Hi everyone, it's Mitch from SportsChatPlace.com, and it is Monday, December 24th, 2018, here with your free live show. We're going to go over tonight's Monday Night Football game. I'm going to give out a pick in that one. I have a premium pick on the side, but we'll give out a pick on the total here on the show. And then what I'm going to do is we're going to look at all of the remaining college football bowl games. Going to look at some of the key factors in those games. I might even give out some picks that might be premium picks later on down the road, and we'll just talk about who's playing, who's not playing, and how much of a factor these have been in some of the games that have already been played. You know, when we looked at the Arizona State game earlier this year against Fresno State in the bowls, you know, the Arizona State receiver not playing was gigantic. The game was tight, and it came down to really the end, and it's like, boy, having him on the field could have been a difference maker in that game. Of course, for Houston, we could see that, when Henderson for Memphis, when Ed Oliver was in the game in that Houston-Memphis game at the end of the season, we could see that when Oliver came out of that game in the second half, Memphis ran all over them. And then we saw it in the Houston game against Army in the bowl. Oliver wasn't in there, along with several other Houston defenders, and Army just ran all over him. So it wasn't, necessarily that. And then Memphis, Henderson wasn't there in that game either. And that was the difference maker as well. These were, the bowl games have been fairly good matchups. Traditionally, they are. These are teams that don't play each other a lot, teams that are motivated, and, sometimes more motivated than others. Yeah, we've seen games in the past where teams are just like, we don't want to be here. Generally, that's, the bigger and better teams. And, I think we're seeing that in, a game that we're going to go over in a little bit, and a game where, there might be a shot where we can catch a dog in a low-scoring game. But, there's just one game today. It's the Monday Night Football game. So like I said, if you're joining us a little bit late, we're going to go over a bunch of the college football bowl games that are remaining. We're going to go over all of them. And we're going to look at who's not playing in these games and how that's going to affect these games. And, I'll give out some free picks, some of these that might be premium picks later on down the road. It's my Christmas present to you guys, or holiday present, however you guys do it, whether you celebrate Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or whatever the case may be. Whatever holidays the other ones there are. We're not a religious site. We don't care. But we want everyone to have a happy holiday. So most of that, to me, Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday. It's the least commercial of the holidays. At least it's always been. Lately it's, we're going to go over all the bowl games. Like I said, we're not going to talk about it right this second. But we're going to go over them. And that'll be part of the show. So you'll know pretty much what I think at that point. But, of course, generally on this show, we do 3 free picks every single day. Today's going to be a special show. So if you took the time to join us today, bonus, big time bonus, because, like I said, we're going to go over all the college football bowl games. I wasn't sure what I was going to do on today's show, earlier in the week. But, when I came up with this idea of the college football bowl games, I've been looking over the bowl games, and I can't decide, I couldn't decide if I was going to, what I was going to do with today's show. And I just thought maybe going over all of the bowl games that are remaining, kind of just taking a quick glance, giving out a free pick here and there, and talk about some of the players not playing. I think that goes well. If you're watching us on YouTube, if you could hit the thumbs up, I appreciate it. I see already someone's hit the thumbs down on me. I haven't even given a pick yet. Wow. There's a lot of trolls out there on YouTube. I know that. No accountability. But just the way that it is. But anyways, let's get to this Monday Night Football game, and then, like I said, we'll go over every single college football bowl game that's remaining, and I'll just give a brief opinion on it. Some of them I'll give picks, some of them I won't give picks, but we'll just see how it goes. And then tomorrow we got games again, so we'll be back in action. But today's really one of the slowest days. This is the second slowest day next to the All-Star break in baseball. I didn't even realize it was coming, so I didn't really prepare for it, but we have a plan in action. We're going to go over all the bowl games. I'm not going to give out every free bowl game, that's for sure. I give out, the premium members always get the best treatment. And of course, just because I give out a pick here doesn't mean I won't change my mind by the time the games actually go either. That's for sure. But we got the Raiders taking on the Broncos tonight. This is the final game for the Raiders in Oakland, and the total in this one is set at 43 points. It's been interesting because the Broncos' offense has been pretty inept. Philip Lindsay's done a great job at running back coming in, but we just have not seen many points. 16 and 14, 24 in their two previous games before that, 23, 17, but the last two he's absolutely anemic. Meanwhile, the Raiders, 16 points last week against the subpar Bengals team, and 24 at home against the Steelers, 33 at home against the Chiefs, 17 on the road, 23 on the road, 6 at home against a good Chargers defense. Denver's defense is pretty good too, and their offense is absolutely hideous. But 43 is a pretty good number here for Monday night game. It's the only game in town. Of course, it's the final game. It's final game for the black hole, at least this time around. But I think that we see an over here. I think that we see some points on the board. I think Gruden, opens it up here at home. And I think the home crowd kind of inspires the Raiders, and I think the Broncos will need to do whatever they can to keep up. We know the Raiders have some deficiencies as well on defense. So I think we see some points. I think what we see here is a lot of big plays. So I'll take the over in the Broncos-Raiders game. It's a lean at best. So like I said, now we're going to go over every single college football bowl game. Of course, we have free picks on every single game every single day at sportschatplays.com. Our best bets always over at sportschatexperts.com. And we're going to go over all of the remaining bowl games. I'll give out some picks. I'm going to give an opinion at least on every game, and we'll talk about some of the players that aren't playing in these games too and what effect that's going to have on them. Because we've already seen the players that aren't playing have a big effect. So Boston College taking on Boise, and this is an interesting one because what we saw in this season is that Boise has they've been good for the most part, but in their step-up games against Oklahoma State, they came up short, and they also came up short in the championship game for the Mountain West Conference against Fresno State. They had beaten Fresno State earlier in the season. I think Boise had, for them, a disappointing season, while Boston College, I really thought this was the team in the ACC that was going to make some noise. Boise also lost to San Diego State, who we saw get waxed. Meanwhile, Boston College has lost their last 3 games, including, getting shelled against Syracuse, then, losing against Florida State at Florida State, who's wasn't a very good team this year. And then they kind of hung in there with Clemson on that night game before giving in. So not really riding the wave of momentum. But Boston College has some pretty good players on this roster. And, Dillon is really the guy, the running back, and he's injured. But, his status is unknown here. So we're going to have to really watch the status of Dillon. If he's not playing, I would say Boston College doesn't have a lot of a chance. But if he is playing, then they stand a chance. So we definitely want to watch his status going forward. So this is one where, we'll have a better read in a couple of days. But what we're doing, if you joined us late, we're going over every single college football bowl game. Some of these games I'm going to give out picks. Some of these games I'm not going to give out picks. Some of the games I'll give out picks that my opinion might change later. Some of them I love. So we got Georgia Tech taking on Minnesota. The angle here is Paul Johnson's last game at Georgia Tech. The line in this one has jumped from 3.5 to 5.5. Minnesota has been generally a disappointment all season long. They needed the win in the Axe game against Wisconsin, and they got it to make it to this bowl game. But boy, they had many other chances. They also beat Fresno State earlier in the year, so this has been a tough team to figure out. PJ Fleck, rowing the boat, but the boat's got him to 6-6, but at least it got him to a bowl game, which is something it didn't get him to last year. They lost to Northwestern as a bowl team, then they waxed Purdue 41-10. It's just, like I said, tough team to figure out. Beat was Indiana, who's terrible. Lost to Illinois, who's awful. 55-31. Losing at Nebraska, getting crushed by Ohio State, crushed by Iowa, crushed by Maryland. Wins over Miami of Ohio. I gotta say that Georgia Tech, played a tougher schedule than Minnesota did, and 5.5 points seems like reasonable number, and probably where my money will be at with the Yellow Jackets in this one. The next game is Cal against TCU, and I was seriously disappointed. This is the Cheez-It Bowl. I love Cheez-Its. I don't love this game, but I do love Cheez-Its, and I'm not ashamed to say it. TCU had a really disappointing season. They had that big game against Ohio State earlier in the year, and they played Ohio State really tough in Jerry World. But outside of that game, we did not see TCU play well really the whole rest of the season. Cal, on the other hand, was surprisingly good on defense. So Cal was surprisingly good on defense, but in that last game of the year against Stanford, they kind of just really laid an egg, and I just did not like the way that whole thing went down. TCU won 3 of their last 4 games. They beat Kansas State, who is not good this year. They beat Baylor, who is a bowl team, but 16-9. And then they beat Oklahoma State, who, if you can figure that team out, you're better than me. The wins for Cal at the end of the season came against Washington, who's a pretty good team, Rose Bowl, right? 6-point loss to Washington State. They beat USC 15-14, beat Colorado 33-21, and lost to Stanford 23-13 in a game that I still can't figure out. The ones I can't figure out are, Cal losing to UCLA, Arizona, and, trounced by Oregon. I mean, this stuff doesn't even make sense, but what does make sense is this team plays pretty well on the road. And I think that's what we need to look at. And this is pretty much, it's a road game, but it's not too far for them. I'll tell you what, I'll take the Cheez-Its, and it's a lean to Cal at this point, laying the point, but I don't know. We'll have to kind of see. But Duke taking on Temple. This game is on Thursday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. It's the Walk-Ons Independence Bowl. Boy, all these bowl games have changed names and, over the years changed sponsors. Temple was a team that I had circled at the beginning of the season. They had a lot of returning players, a lot of returning stars. Started the season really, really slow. Duke is a team that, very, very tough to figure out as well. Really good quarterback, probably a pro prospect in Jones. But this team kind of disappointed to end the season, losing to Miami and then getting slaughtered by Wake Forest. I think Temple has a little bit more momentum coming in, and with Manny Diaz coming in as the head coach, I kind of think that that's the direction that I'm leaning, because we know when Manny comes in, it's going to be a lot of enthusiasm. And speaking of Manny Diaz, the Miami Hurricanes taking on Wisconsin in the Pinstripe Bowl. These two teams played each other last year in the Orange Bowl. So a little bit of a step down game for both these teams. This one's in New York, which really hurts Miami, I would say, because the weather, these guys are just I grew up in Miami myself, and I know that I never saw snow till I was 15 years old. And I'm going to guess that a lot of these Miami players haven't had a lot of exposure to the cold weather. The guys who are local, meanwhile, Wisconsin, it's freezing in Wisconsin, so the weather probably going to be less of a factor for them. We saw Wisconsin really kind of beat up on Miami last year in that Orange Bowl, but Miami had a lot of injured players. I think the Canes have somewhat of the revenge factor going, and it's still lean at this point. The next game is one that you guys should probably circle, and this is when they're easy. The Academy Sports Outdoors Texas Bowl, and like I said on this show, some of these things are going to be my Christmas gift to you guys, and some of them are games I'm going to have less of an opinion on, but we're just going to go over them anywhere. But I think when we look at this game right here, the Academy Sports outdoors Texas Bowl, where Baylor is, I know they're at home and the line is dropped from 6-4, but Vandy runs at almost 7 yards. Their top running back averages about 7 yards a clip, and the Baylor defense is one of the worst run defenses in the country. So, I don't know. I think, we've seen teams that can run against teams that can't stop the run. We've seen that already this bowl season, and those games have been some of the ugliest games that we've seen so far. And I expect that this one could fit that category. We go to Friday, where the Franklin American Mortgage Music City Bowl, Auburn, 63% of the bets on the Tigers here, yet the line drops from 5 to 3.5. Purdue 6-6 on the season. Of course, the signature win for Purdue was at home against Ohio State in the game where they routed them, and then they needed to beat Indiana to close out the season to make it to this bowl game. They got that win, and so we've seen Purdue on both ends of the spectrums. Auburn, probably going to be some house cleaning there as far as assistant coaches go, and even Gus Malzahn somewhat on the hot seat a year after going to the SEC title game, which to me is absolutely absurd. Which Auburn team shows up, which Purdue team shows up. We know Purdue, comes in highly motivated, but Auburn generally in these type of neutral site games, like we saw to start the season against Washington, this is a team that's traditionally showed up. So, of course, what we're doing, if you joined us late, we're going over all the bowl games. And some of these games I'm going to give a pick. Some of them I'm just going to give an opinion. We're going to talk about some players that aren't playing in the games as well and what effect that's had, because we've seen that already have huge effects on the games that have been played so far. And we gave out a pick on the Monday Night Football game. If you're joining us late, that we gave out the over on the Broncos Raiders game. But of course, I'll have premium picks on a lot of these games, and they may or may not. As the week goes on, things change, lines change. So what we have in this next game is really interesting, though. The Camping World Bowl. This game is in Orlando, and it's on Friday, December 28th, which is going to be a great day for football. We got that. We believe we have 3 games on Friday, but they all look to be good ones. And West Virginia taking on Syracuse. West Virginia, their starting left tackle, has decided not to play in this game. Of course, Will Grier, the quarterback, also not playing in this game. So this line has gone from Syracuse plus 6.5 to Syracuse minus 1.5. Expect the Orange to be motivated. They've played some pretty good teams this season, and I know West Virginia still has a lot of good players. And, when your quarterback says he's not going to play, and that happens a month ago, you have a lot of time to prepare with your backups. But we know Will Grier is Will Grier, and pretty tough to replace. Washington State against Iowa State. Interesting game here. The line dropping 3 points with the Cougs favored by 3 against the Cyclones, but we know that Campbell's done an amazing job at Iowa State. This is a team that, they beat Oklahoma last year as 18-point dogs, and they didn't back down much this year. They had quarterback problems, not that their quarterback can't play. It's that their quarterback was injured the whole season, and it's they had to go with different players. But I just think that this is one of those games probably going to be a pretty good matchup, and I think points are going to be scored in this game. The total set at 56. I expect that this one's going to have no problem. I think the punters aren't going to see a lot of work in this game. Now, the next game is really, really interesting to me. It's the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, which has always been one of the big games of the year. They moved it to a day game at noon Eastern. This one used to always be played on New Year's Eve at night, and this year it's a day game, as they try and figure out the playoffs and everything. But Michigan taking on Florida. Michigan has a lot of players sitting out this game, like half their defense is sitting out. And this is a team that leaned on their defense all season long. Meanwhile, the Florida defense, highly underrated coming into this game, getting 6.5 points. I'll tell you, Michigan never plays well in bowl games under Jim Harbaugh. They rarely play well in any kind of big games. And, when we look at last year, Michigan lost to South Carolina in their bowl game. They got waxed. So they're laying 6.5 in this, missing their top 3 or 4 defensive guys when they're a defensive team. against a Florida team, which if you haven't seen, they'll talk about all these Michigan guys, but I'll tell you, Florida has a defensive end that doesn't get a lot of credit. His name is Zuniga. And what he can do is run down running backs from the backside. I've never seen defensive ends that have been able to do this. Maybe Julius Peppers when he was at North Carolina, but he's a defensive end that can cut around the entire line. He runs the running backs down from the backside. It's pretty amazing to watch, and you guys will hear his name in the NFL for many, many, many years. I think he might have a coming out party in this one. Meanwhile, South Carolina, the team we just spoke about that beat Michigan last year in their bowl game, takes on Virginia. So we know South Carolina is a team that shows up in bowl games. They're favored by 5.5 here against Virginia. And Bronco Mendenhall has had the Cavs playing some pretty good football most of the year. It's a team that, they didn't always win a lot of games. When they didn't win, they seemed to cover. And then they would lose games that we thought that they should win no problem. So I don't know. It's one of those weird games that, points in the hand are probably pretty valuable. If you joined us late, we're going through all the college football bowl games. A lot of these games I'm telling you my opinion. Some of these games I'm giving outright picks on that will be premium picks later on down the road. It's my Christmas present to you guys. We're talking about players that aren't playing in these games too and what effect that's going to have as, we've seen that already. That Houston Army game, without Ed Oliver in there. Memphis without Henderson at running back. With Arizona State missing the wide receiver. All factored in those games. And we have guys not playing in games, and we're discussing it as we go. Now, here's the next game is the weird bowl game of all bowl games. It always is. It's the Arizona Bowl. It's the Nova Home Loans Arizona Bowl this year. This is the first year that this game's actually going to be on TV. It's normally, this is a internet only game. It's a bowl game, and it's the only one that's never on TV. But this year, it actually is on TV, and it features Nevada up against Arkansas State. Arkansas State 3-3, or 6-4 against the spread in their last 10 coming in. Nevada 5-5. This is one of those games where I don't absolutely love it. But Nevada a little closer to home in this one. But, you have a Sun Belt team against a Mountain West team. And what we've seen so far is that the Mountain West teams have looked pretty strong. Arkansas State did win their last 4 games coming in, but that was South Alabama, Coastal Carolina, Louisiana Monroe, and Texas State. While Nevada lost at UNLV to end the season as a 14-point favorite. Wins over San Jose State, Colorado State, San Diego State, and Hawaii. So what we've seen from both these teams is they beat the teams that are lousy and they lose against the good teams. That makes this one a pretty tough call. And with all the other games and all the other action, with this one being on Saturday, there's no reason to chase this thing unless, I'll study it and I'll restudy it again. But right now, I don't see a great angle on this game. What we see is 32% of the money is on 32% of the bets on Arkansas State with a line that's dropped 0.5 point. So it's inverse line movement. Notre Dame taking on Clemson. College football playoff game number 1. It's the Goodyear Cotton Bowl. And I expect to see a ton of points in this game. Clemson, Dabo Swinney has done a great job recruiting there. I mean, he has got so much talent on that roster, and he hasn't squandered it, that's for sure. We see other programs like Miami, my team, right, where talent, they have all these NFL superstars, yet, they have they haven't really been able to put it together, while Clemson, I mean, they don't waste a guy, that Clifford Etienne, oh man. Can he fly? Meanwhile, Notre Dame, I think a surprising season for them. 60% of the bets, of the early bets here, are on Notre Dame. So the line has moved up from 11.5 to 12.5, even on that heavy action on the Irish, who's always a super public team, and everybody knows that. Both these teams, 13-0 for Clemson, 12-0 for Notre Dame. Someone's O has got to go. But one thing we know about these college football playoff games, there's been 8 college football playoff games total. 6 of them have been decided by 17 points or more. These games are rarely close. So if you're banking on a close game like last year's Oklahoma-Georgia game, it's got about a little bit better than 20% chance of that happening based on what's happened in these college football playoff games. I think we see a ton of scoring. I think the over 55 is easy money in that game. Anyways, Alabama against Oklahoma. The total in this one is 77.5 points. The Tide 13-0. They were tested against Georgia, but they were able to get it done in the fourth quarter without their quarterback. They find a way. This is what happens when you prepare well for games. Meanwhile, on the other side, Oklahoma getting 14 points in this one, and this is an offense that has scored, and we saw the Alabama defense get torched, by Georgia. So I think the Tide are somewhat vulnerable here, but the total set at 77.5. What you don't want to do if you're Oklahoma, you don't want to have your defense out on the field all day because they have been bad. The committee might say that there's been points where they've stepped up. But I say there are points they've been stepped on as, even that loss to Texas, their one loss, they got lit up like a Christmas tree. So I think in this playoff game, the totals opened at 79, which is more than 11 touchdowns. And it's still at 77.5, which is a little better than 11 touchdowns. Not really sure in this one. I'll have a pick in the premium area as we get closer to the game. This will probably be one of those picks that I entered in because that's what the premium members expect. But I think we're going to have a pretty solid game. And in this one, with a 14-point line, the books could be dialed in on the number. If you're joining us late, what we did is we went over Monday Night Football game. We give out the over in the Raiders Broncos game. It's a lean at best. We only have the one game today. And then what I decided to do is go over every single college football bowl game, give out some picks, some opinions, talk about players that aren't playing, talk about players that are playing, talk about momentum and some of these other things. So, Military Bowl on New Year's Eve at noon. New Year's Eve has always been a great day for college football, and this year no different. 6 college football games on New Year's Eve next Monday. So while today, Monday, Christmas Eve, there's only one game. Next Monday on New Year's Eve, we got 6 college football games. We got NBA is going to be in action. Everyone's in action on New Year's Eve. So Cincinnati Bearcats taking on Virginia Tech in the Military Bowl presented by Northrop Grumman. The Bearcats 10-2 this season. Really one of the most surprising teams in all of college football. Meanwhile, Virginia Tech 6-6 this season. They had a game against Marshall that they weren't going to play if they lost the week before. They needed to win their last 2 games to become bowl eligible. So they have a little bit of momentum coming into this one. But I don't love the way they're playing. Luke Fickell was a guy that I really had very little faith in coming into this game, coming into this season. But I think he's done a real nice job at Cincinnati, and I think he deserves some accolades. He was the interim coach when Jim Tressel was fired at Ohio State. He was the guy that stepped in as the head coach, and he had a really bad season. So going to Cincinnati, which has always been a step-up job, when you look at all of the Cincinnati coaches recently, outside of Tommy Tuberville, who was replaced, you look at Brian Kelly, and you look at Mark D'Antonio, and, even Butch Jones, who got the Tennessee job and was, didn't work out for him. But, this has been a big-time step-up job. Notre Dame, Tennessee, Michigan State head coaches all coming out of the Cincinnati program. And I think Fickell, has got his team motivated. And the Bearcats are way underrated, even as a 5.5-point favorite in this thing. We go to their next game, Stanford up against Pittsburgh. And Bryce Love not playing in this game, and he didn't play a lot of games this season. And this is where you go back to the beginning of the season and you say, man, those guys who call themselves the expert on some of the big networks, they really don't know what the hell they're talking about, because basically they had Bryce Love as they had given him the Heisman Trophy before the season even started. But he certainly didn't earn that trophy, and he really doesn't make much of a difference for the Stanford team that he didn't play much for most of this season. But I think what we have in this one is we have a Pittsburgh team that's been inconsistent, but they're going to be somewhat motivated. I think we see a good amount of points in this thing. I like the over in this game. as well. I think the Stanford defense is going to have trouble containing that Pitt offense, to be honest with you. Speaking of good matchups, the Red Box Bowl, which I have no idea what the Red Box is. I know my wife thinks it's Cartier, but the Red Box must be something else. There must be a company called Red Box also who's sponsoring this bowl game between Michigan State and Oregon. Meanwhile, the Ducks, if you have picks that you want to give out, then the place to do that, of course, is in our Facebook group. But Oregon taking on Michigan State. Michigan State's been a little bit of a disappointment this season. They struggled against Utah State earlier this year, but Utah State ended up being a good team. So that's not really where I have the problems with Michigan State. Where I have the problem with Michigan State is where they just have games where they just have absolutely not shown up this season. The Nebraska 9-6 loss, the 26-6 home loss against Ohio State, where they played well for a half. Michigan, a team that they've beaten, in recent years, losing 21-7. They beat Purdue. They beat Maryland at Maryland, and Penn State at Penn State. So it doesn't even make a lot of sense. They host Northwestern, they lose. Then they go to Indiana, they win. Redbox is a company that provides DVDs without going to a store to rent. Is this streaming? Because do people even have DVDs anymore? I don't even know. But I don't know which Michigan State team shows up, which Oregon team shows up. I really rarely like laying points with a team that's not as physical against a physical team, but I think that's what we have. That's what we have here. So I see DVD coming. It rents DVDs in a red box in department stores. Okay, is it like a vending machine? I don't even know. Like they used to have at hotels. But our next game, the AutoZone Liberty Bowl, Oklahoma State taking on Missouri. Originally, Oklahoma State was opened as a 10-point favorite in this one. Now, or as a 10-point dog. Now they're 8-point dogs. Justice Hill not playing for Oklahoma State. He's their best player. He's their running back. Meanwhile, Drew Lock playing for Missouri, the quarterback. This guy can really throw the ball around the field. I expect some points in this game. The total set at 74.5. Over. Northwestern up against Utah. This is a pretty interesting game. Northwestern generally plays up to the level of their competition. Utah plays that weird style, and when they hit hard. So generally, when Utah is not well rested, is when they're not playing well because they hit hard, so they get worn down a lot. So I just think that Utah has got an edge here over Northwestern. I think they can out-physical them, even though touchdown seems like a very, very big number to be laying against the Wildcats. But we're going to find out what the Big Ten is made of. Some of these games, it's a little hard to tell because we haven't seen these conferences yet in the bowl game. So we just aren't sure how these conferences are going to hold up. Because generally, you can see the conferences start to get picked off in these bowl games or, not get picked off. Like last year, it was the SEC that was getting picked off, right? But this year, Texas A&M against North Carolina State, we got an SEC-ACC game in the Tax Slayer Gator Bowl. Moves to a night game. This was always a day game on New Year's Day. Now it's New Year's Eve at 7:30 p.m. Of course, this one's held in the Gator Bowl Stadium. Texas A&M, 19th in the country. While North Carolina State, 9-3, they actually have the better record here, and they have a lot of fast players. This line's gone from 4.5 to 7. NC State has some players out for this game, but they have plenty of team speed. Of course, Texas A&M, losers to Clemson and Alabama. They played both of them, and they played a pretty heavy-duty schedule this season. Jimbo Fisher generally can get his teams up for bowl games. We've seen him do it in the past at Florida State, including winning a national championship. They beat LSU in that big overtime game to end the season, but boy, there was a lot of funky flags in that game, a lot of weird calls, 74-72. Meanwhile, NC State got to play a makeup game, and this was like one of our games of the year in the premium area. They were 24.5-point favorites against East Carolina. They won by 55. We loved them there. But against rival North Carolina, only a 7.5-point win. Of course, a stomping of Louisville, just like everybody else did. Losers to Wake, who have already won a bowl game this season, stomping Florida State, losing to Syracuse by 10, losing to Clemson. So most of this is a good team. This is a good NC State team. I know they're missing, like I said, they're missing players here who will be taking the game off, but I don't know. It just seems like giving a touchdown to NC State, not such a smart idea. Mississippi State up against Iowa, SEC against the Big Ten. Generally, this is where Mississippi State plays their best football of the season, is in these bowl games, as we move to New Year's Day, by the way. But, of course, if you joined us late, what we're doing is we're just going over all of the bowl games. I'm giving out some picks. I'm giving out a lot of opinions. And then, I'll have premium picks on a lot of these games. Some of these games that we go over today will be premium picks. Some of them will hold true for a whole nother week. Some of them, I might change my opinion as I dig in the numbers a little deeper. But Mississippi State taking on Iowa. Iowa is getting 7 in this one. Originally they were +5, and they've gone to +7, and that's with 63% of all the bets being made on the Iowa Hawkeyes. I think what we've seen here in these games is that on New Year's Day, Mississippi State, when they were under Mullen, that's when they always played their best. They were lousy all season long, or underperformed all season long, but on New Year's Day, they seemed to hold it together. Meanwhile, Iowa's been a slow starter in their games, and their best players are their tight ends. They have 2 tight ends that are NFL prospects, probably a first or second rounder, and the other guy's maybe like a third, fourth rounder type. But 2 of the top tight ends in the country are at Iowa this season, but neither of them are playing in this game, so I think that really doesn't help Iowa. And like I said, Mississippi State generally shows up for these bowl games. Kind of see where I'm leaning in this one. You go to the Fiesta Bowl, and weird timing in this one, right? 1 o'clock Eastern time for the Fiesta Bowl. Normally a night game. And why is it a night game? Because generally it used to be outside at Sun Devil Stadium. Now it's inside. So it's a little different story. You don't want to be playing day games in Arizona. Doesn't matter what time of year. But Central Florida, 7.5-point dogs in this game against LSU. Of course, Central Florida's got the longest winning streak in the country. Been covering a lot of games. And, of course, their quarterback, Mackenzie Milton, out for this game. LSU, well, they haven't had a quarterback in many years, right? Many years. So I think the Knicks aren't playing today. Someone asked the question, what do I think about the Knicks? The Knicks aren't playing today, so I don't have an opinion. Today we went over Monday Night Football, and then we're going over all the bowl games. And then tomorrow we'll get back to our normal show where we're here doing at least 3 free picks almost every single day. Well, every single day. But LSU against Central Florida, we know Central Florida is going to be seriously motivated. And, everyone talks about, well, not everyone, but a lot of people talk about how Central Florida doesn't play anyone in their regular season schedule, and that's true. They haven't really played a lot of teams in their regular season schedule, but last year they beat an SEC team in a bowl game. So they're getting 7.5 in this one. Kentucky taking on Penn State. And Penn State, always a serious public team. I think they've been somewhat underperforming this season, but it looks like in this one that Penn State, the line going from 4.5 to 6.5, and it's I don't know. I just think that Kentucky is going to be a little bit more motivated here. I just think that they're, Penn State always overrated. I think Kentucky is somewhat underrated. I know Kentucky's missing some players for this game, but I think it doesn't matter. I think what we see from Penn State generally is big public backing with very little substance. We got Ohio State up against Washington in the Rose Bowl, the granddaddy of them all. If you're joining us late, we're just going through all the bowl games. We got 2 more left to go. And, we'll go over all these again, and we'll have premium picks on these games. And, one thing we see from Washington, trouble scoring points on the road. Gave it out already. But anyways, got Ohio State laying a touchdown here against Washington. We saw Ohio State. This is Urban Meyer's last game as head coach of Ohio State. You got to expect some motivation. But the thing about it for the Pac-12 is that the Rose Bowl is like their national championship game. They know they're not going to get in the playoffs, and in most seasons, unless the system changes. So the Rose Bowl is their championship. We saw them kind of lay down in some of these games, and I think issues at quarterback are a problem when you're playing against a really good head coach like Urban Meyer. We know Chris Peterson is also one of the great head coaches in the game. So the Rose Bowl is not going to be a disappointing game, that's for sure. But like I said, with Browning in there, I think Washington might have their work cut out for them. We head to the final game of the regular bowl season, and this one is Georgia against Texas. Georgia laying 12.5 in this thing in the Sugar Bowl. So it's somewhat of a home game for Georgia because the SEC champion or the SEC is always in the Sugar Bowl. But one thing that we know about this one as well is that Texas is going to show up. Their fans, they always show up, and they always show up in droves, and that's probably why they were picked to play in this game. We know the Georgia offense can move the ball. We saw it against Alabama. But I wouldn't just circle the dogs here, and put them in as, that they're going to score a ton, or do it against this Texas team because you got to remember, Texas played Oklahoma twice. So they're not going to see anything from the Georgia offense that they haven't already seen because the Oklahoma offense, I think, is better than the Georgia offense this year. At least that's what it says points-wise, and that's what the numbers say. And the numbers never lie. So we covered every single college football bowl game. We gave out the over in the Monday Night Football. This is Mitch. Thanks for joining me. Have a great Christmas Eve for those of you that celebrate. Have a great holiday season. I will see you guys tomorrow. We'll be back with our normal show. And those of you that took the time to watch our bowl preview show, hopefully you get something out of it. And like I said, some of those will even be premium picks. So you guys made out on that. But anyways, have a great day, everyone. And I will see you guys tomorrow.